So here, to kind of kick off what I'm calling my Life with Neil series,
Love that.
is a really lovely friend of mine who has an amazing smile, one of the best smiles I know. But the purpose of these conversations is really to introduce people in my life who either inspire me or I think have something really important to share, or doing something that I think people should. And so Elizabeth and I, Truth in Advertising, have known each other for a long, long time. And probably, so long now, we probably don't quite remember where everyone.
Main youth leadership.
Well, yeah.
Well, even before that, though, yeah.
That. But Elizabeth is really doing something really special right now that I've just, really been intrigued and just been watching over the past couple of years about what she's building, something called the Mindful Employer Collaborative, if I got that correct. But you've had kind of a background mostly around kind of healthcare businesses, right? So just give us a little bit of a story before we get into the Mindful Employer Collaborative about your journey and what we got here today.
Well,
so I should say, the title, you've already seen the title. This is Elizabeth Ross Holmstrom.
Thank you. The journey, like I guess so many other people, it didn't start out in a way that I ever thought, that I'd be here. Yet every single step along the way in that journey has led to here in a really beautiful way that I'm noticing more and more every day. I didn't take a traditional path in terms of my education. I had to leave school at really after 9th grade was really probably the last grade I truly completed. And then I had to get my GED later, and I took college courses later, and I had to go right to work. And for the longest time, especially when I moved to the East Coast, I grew up on the West Coast. When I moved to the East Coast, geez, everybody had really, almost everybody I knew when I met here, had been to college. And I was so embarrassed by that. And luckily I just kept working. So I worked in commercial real estate for quite a while, doing marketing and development, business development. And then we went through there was kind of a mini recession that happened in the late 90s, or the 80s rather, late 80s. And that really changed my world. And I ended up being in auctions. I think you remember that maybe. We were auctioning houses, and I realized I didn't have the stomach for that. I could auction a business because there's risk in business, but somebody's house was just something I didn't have in my DNA. And so I left, and I ended up in healthcare. And literally for 20 years, I was involved in workplace health and health insurance. And really, my interest had always been kind of on the well-being side. I started for a really small physician-run managed care company. And so for the first couple of years, I traversed the state of Maine and the East Coast teaching people about preventive care, right? Because before that, the way your insurance worked is that your insurance plan was only kicked in at 100% if you were in the ER, the emergency room. Other than that, it was kind of an 80-20 situation. So a lot of people that were, by and large, kind of healthy, the second they needed a little bit of care, they would go straight to the ER. And so that was sort of interesting that as I look back, I've always kind of been in roles that were brand new, and then really in behavior change roles. And so in that work, I had been all along building these big systems of complex care management teams, and then also, kind of taking care of people at either end of the spectrum, building well-being programs and physical challenges and activity challenges and those kinds of things for people, employees that were well, and we wanted to help them stay that way, all the way to taking care of people that were their sickest and developing these interdisciplinary nurse teams that help those people. And
a quick question about that.
Yeah.
Were you kind of pulling off the shelf, or were you creating programs?
we were creating programs with some of the most forward like people that had come from, you know, General Electric and these large national accounts, PepsiCo, I would name more, but anyway, these large organizations that were really had seen leading edge work that were advocacy models and behavior change and coaching, health coaching models. And so we were creating these interdisciplinary nurse teams to meet these new visions that people had about how we might better help people in our system that's really, as you know, in the US, really challenged, right? Like it's not connected at all. And so that was really gratifying work. And then that led me to leading health and wellness for a large bank, a global bank, but I just was in charge for the US population. And after a few years of doing that, I loved it. It was the biggest responsibility I had to have responsibility for a population. And I realized that we really weren't addressing root cause, right? Which was, to me, in looking out at my office and I went through a lot of personal, huge personal challenges with losing my mom and my dad and my younger brother to cancer, all in 2 years. And just realizing I was stressed. I was just working crazy hours. I wasn't doing a lot of the things that, you know, I love to sing. Like I stopped doing music. I wasn't riding my mountain bike like I used to. Like just my life was work. And so all of that had me take a sabbatical. And in that sabbatical is how I ended up doing a lot of research around how can we better manage the stress that's coming our way, which led me to mindfulness. And the research started around productivity and how is it that we've gone from like these 40-hour work weeks that had, you know, lots of breaks and coffee and weekends off. And, you know, when you left work at 5 o'clock, you couldn't get back in unless you had the key to the office. Remember that in the 90s, 80s? And so that first work that I did was just around, why is it? How have we lost our way there? I think there are a lot of factors. I think there are factors around just these companies coming larger and larger and larger and larger, and then even some of the small companies are serving those larger companies, and so the pressure's on to create, like in this global economy, the competition's coming from not just our neighborhoods but all over the globe. So I think a lot of people can relate to working has been more and more. And so I began to look at how can we reinstitute those breaks. And so I took the concept of trying to reinstitute breaks in our working environment with the behavior change that I'd been experiencing for 20 years. And so I created, as you know, Break Together.
Right.
And that was a great find. I had, for the last couple of years, had been implementing just educational sessions and workshops and seminars and programs around the importance of taking mindful breaks in the workplace and being more cognizant of how we go about our day and where our power is, right? And in doing that work, people were asking, like, so Elizabeth, once we take, this workshop and we go through the session, what's next? And as I looked out into the landscape, like I got my head up out of my little world that I was working in around breaks, and I realized, like, and mindfulness, I'm so fascinated by meditation and just, these new ways of conscious leadership and compassionate leadership. And that I'm finding to be this much broader change that's happening, right? There's really a paradigm shift that's going on that I think some of it is kind of, we're getting to this point where, like, stress has permeated everything, right? Every single company that offers healthcare, I can guarantee you their top 5 expenditures are negatively impacted by stress. Those diseases are negatively impacted by stress, right?
And I just know, kind of from my other work in terms of what, we have, particularly from Elizabeth Blackman, who's the Nobel Prize winner, discoverer of telomeres. Telomeres are the sort of like little shoelace end caps on the back of your DNA.
Yes.
And so they protect our DNA. And in her research, stress contributes to the shortening of those telomeres, which basically
Yes.
increases our aging. So there's a
Yes.
good reason to be focused on stress. It's not just like
Mm.
a soft thing. Uh,
No,
it's,
no, absolutely.
it always struck me, back in corporations, that
Mm.
the people that talked about the soft stuff was really,
Mm-hmm. We're what?
well, people who talked about the soft stuff, like remember how
Yes.
it was sort of like the soft stuff, right?
Oh, yeah.
Building, etc. was really the hard stuff.
Right. The
So
most, I mean, equally important to whatever else it is that you're doing, right? Because the
yeah,
thing that has really fascinated me is watching the just the terminology about humans at work that change, right? I
mm,
mean, we used to just be employees, right? And then we became resources, right? Human resources. And then before, I don't know, a few years ago, this thing popped up on LinkedIn as somebody's title, and it said human capital strategist. I'm like, now we're capital? Like, come on. Like, no. My personal mission is to blow up that term.
yeah,
We are not human capital. We are human beings,
yeah,
right? Human beings.
yeah.
Oh my God. So anyway, that work with Break Together kind of led to this greater thinking. Because as you know, we've met because of our passion around leadership development,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And the importance of, people that are managing people
Hmm.
can impact negatively or positively people's stress levels, right? Depending on how well trained they are to be managing people, right?
Right.
Can you hear that? Yeah, little siren. Sorry, kids.
I'll
So
take you. So the beauty from working from home, right?
I know it is the beauty. Oh, here it comes.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
We can probably
Can you
edit
hear? Can you hear me?
that. Yeah, I can.
Okay. As I'm covering this, you'll know to edit that
Yeah.
part out. But so the beauty, I think, of just realizing like that all of this stress comes from how we're looking at our companies in terms of their profitability, but also their impact, right? So I've stumbled upon, I read a book called Firms of Endearment, which was written by Raj Sisodia, who is a professor at Babson. And Firms of Endearment, he did extensive research on organizations, and they actually coined the term conscious capitalism, right?
Mm.
He
Mm.
has since written Conscious Capitalism with the CEO from Whole Foods.
Right.
But this is all important in this big scheme of things because to me, it's all around like the human experience at work and all around this thing that we're really trying to mitigate, or I'm trying to reverse, which is the stress levels that are associated with work. And it turns out that when companies are focused beyond profit as their, profit-based capitalism, and they expand their vision to include like moving the shareholders underneath a broader umbrella called stakeholders, that businesses win.
Mhm.
So his research showed that not only do they win in the short term, but they win in the long term, and it's
Mhm.
significant. So
Mhm.
when your definition of who you're serving as a company includes employees, customers, your shareholders, your suppliers, who they serve, and then community, that when you're focused on all of those things doing well, it's like a quadruple win, and the companies do better financially. So that's one piece. Like it's that, to me, it links right into the studies that were just released with Bates College and Gallup. For our young people are looking for purposeful work. So what better way to build purpose, right, than to make sure that you're conscious about all that you're touching in your business, which kind of goes, it's like Back to the Future. My dad's business, or the business that my dad worked in 50 years ago, was they totally were connected to their community. They knew exactly who all their customers are, and they were always redesigning things based on their customer need, and they always were giving money back to their community, right? Like, it was very, very different. So what I've been thinking about and what I've been noticing in the research is that importance of conscious capitalism, and then your employee connection to mission, right? And to purposeful work. And the Bates College survey says that, 77% of people are coming out and they want out of college right now. And I'll say the boomers too, want purposeful work. We're leaving our organizations and starting our own companies because we want to work for something that matters. And that is becoming more and more on a big human scale, that we want to work on something that matters, right? So that's number one.
Kind of a, just if I can just feed off on that, like a
Of course.
which would be sort of an interesting, for you, maybe people listening, which is, but I had this, breadth of work in sustainability.
Yes.
And one of the influence, sustainability, right, is like, some people, the bigger picture of triple bottom line, etc. But one of the key influences that we used in our research was Jonathan Porritt, and he wrote a book called Capitalism as If It Matters.
Yes.
And which there's a lot in that book, but one of the things that I always have held in that book was, he said, it's not that capitalism is wrong, it's that it's
right.
And
it's
so
what?
It's not that it's wrong, it's outdated.
Yes.
So
yes.
what we look at, you manage what you measure. And we have looked at for well over 100 years, is basically a balance sheet of liabilities and assets, and a P&L of profit and loss. And we've never expanded our thinking of what that is. And so capitalism as if it matters in terms of innovation is not just manufacturing capital and financial capital, but it's also human capital and environmental capital and social capital.
Yes.
So I just wanted to.
And I totally agree. I mean, capitalism has raised the standard of living for billions of people, right? Like, their study shows, just like for years and years, we were just at this level where, like, if you looked at the global population, people are living on less than $1 a day, right? Like the majority of the population. And he shows that, like, it just, the needle goes off in terms of capitalism, which is so important. And it's time that we expanded it, right? And so that first piece around purposeful work was something that I just began paying attention to, and it really sunk in. And then the leadership is the second piece. So one of the things I noticed working in a large organization is that a lot of times the only way up for more responsibility, more sirens, and therefore more money, right? More responsibility equals more money. And very few organizations have a track for individual contributors. There's a ton of people out there that love the work they're doing, and they have no interest in managing human beings, managing people. And yet the only way north in their organization is to take on responsibility for managing people. And so you have a ton of people out there that are managing people because it's the way forward in their career, and yet they're not meant to do it. And so I think it's really time that organizations begin to look at that and make sure that, we start thinking about different ways of people contributing without having that, and being able to move up within a company, but having tracks for individual contributors, and, it can be taking on projects or lines of business or what have you, but it doesn't have to necessarily be managing people. And so, because we know that when people leave work, 75% of the time when they leave, it's because of a manager. It's not because of the work. So purposeful work, leaderships that are connected to their people, think coaching and collaborative leadership over boss leadership, because that's a huge dynamic that is changing rapidly. And then the third piece is back to what we started with, which is well-being, right? And space for well-being. So the break word I found it was a little bit too negative, I think. People are always like, let's break together. And in my mind, it's like, well, we all need to take breaks, and behavior change happens together.
Mhm.
And what I realize is that this is really about being mindful,
Mhm.
right? This is about being mindful about how we're creating our capitalism and how we're treating one another, and then how much space we're allowing people to be able to have time for self-care and self-awareness, right? That mindfulness is about being aware of your moment. It's really boiling things down and simplifying things so that we are present to what's going on in a given moment, and aware of ourself in
Mhm.
that space.
Mhm.
And so that to me is what I'm really after. And so this has all morphed into mindful employer,
Right. So
which is
what's
amazing. And I know
mindful?
that was really long, but
No, no.
it's a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Paradigm shifts take a long time.
It's why we're having this conversation, because it's as educational as it is informative.
Hmm.
So, what is the Mindful Employer Collaborative, and
Hmm.
what are your dreams for it? But
Hmm.
what is its purpose, and how are you going to
Yeah.
go together?
It's focused on the things that we just talked about. So it's
Mhm.
what I'm focused on is helping companies. So as I was doing Break Together, by the way, I'll back up just for a second in that what I notice is that there are thousands of people out there that are really good at this work, really good at bringing mindfulness and training to organizations. One of my mentors is Tara Healy, and she has been the head of mindfulness and Mind the Moment for Harvard Pilgrim for 15 years, like longer than I was ever even aware of the term. And she's been leading this. There are many, many programs out there there's, John Kabat-Zinn, who brought us MBSR, which is mindful based stress reduction. So as I looked at what's out there, there's a lot of people out there doing great work on that piece. And as I was beginning to kind of build this collaborative, this network to promote, these other people doing this work, I realized, like, I don't see anybody like trying to serve as the hub,
Mm.
right? The
Mhm.
hub to help companies. If companies are going to have to move in this paradigm shift that's happening, because they'll be quickly left behind if they don't. And
Mm.
so that's kind of what I narrowed in on, and in particular the employee experience in that piece of this. So we developed from my leadership um, experience, my leadership development experience. I'd been involved in organizations, in these large organizations, in employee engagement surveys for years, right? And we were, part of Best Place to Work and Great Place to Work, and we're looking at the WELL designation, which is part of the LEEDS. The same organization does the LEEDS buildings.
Right.
And so in all of that, I realized that, how do we help companies take a pulse? So there's now 3 components of Mindful Employer. There's a pulse check, which is 6 questions.
Mhm.
Anybody who's interested in having this conversation with their employees can have it, right? So there's 6 questions, and they shockingly help you get at these 3 buckets. How well are employees connected to our mission?
Mhm.
How well are employees connecting and feeling supported by their managers,
Mhm.
their immediate managers? And how much space do they feel like they are being given permission and support for well-being,
Mhm.
right? Like, let's start there. We
Mhm.
know from decades of data that those 3 things are the
Mhm.
top 3 things that matter. Um, there are many other things, and there are many other people doing much more sophisticated employee engagement work. So I'm not saying that we're replacing that. And in fact, I'm really not even targeting these large organizations. 80% of our employees, of our work, of our businesses in the US are small, right?
Yeah.
Small business.
Yeah.
And so I'm really looking at like 10 to 100.
Yeah.
Ironically, our first big client is 400 people, but that's great. They know they're
Well,
first.
the small business administration definition of a small
Mm,
business is 500 or under.
yes. So
So,
good. So they make it.
last I
And
knew, this is,
yeah,
it was 98.2% of America was small business.
exactly.
And I think
And
people
so
don't
I feel like,
really
Yeah, we want to help them.
Yeah, I mean, and here's a good sort of example is that
Mm,
in the aerospace supply chain, if you think
mm.
like Boeing
Yeah, yeah.
and etc., I think 80 to 90% of the supply chain is of less than 100 employees.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And so my thinking is that I think a lot of these companies are already doing this work, right? Especially the small ones. Like they need to do this work to help um, to keep people. You know, this is a really challenging employment market, and so there's the pulse check to help people understand where they are in those three areas. And
Mhm.
then if they're doing well in those three areas, then we've created a designation. And we, as a team of me and like three other people that I've been working on this with for the past year. And so we've created a mindful employer designation,
Mm.
which is what's going to lead to the network. So the designation will not only indicate, and the designation is not given by me. It is not given by us. It is given to you by your employees.
How cool.
So it's not a competition, right?
Right.
There's not the number one mindful employer and the number one, lumber company mindful employer.
Right.
You're mindful, you're having these discussions with your people and you care about this work,
Right.
or you might need to be thinking about it,
Right.
right? Like, and
Right.
so it's really set up to be really simple and to be a journey.
Yeah.
And so what happens is when the companies get this information, the feedback from these questions, it just helps them start the conversation. If they're doing great, then fly the designation. And then as we build that, the other piece of this is this collaborative. It's going to be basically an ecosystem. And so everyone will be listed on our site that is being created as we add the companies. And then our goal is to have companies refer to each other. So there's going to be recruiting. So if you want to work, like I was literally describing this to a friend of mine, to a store owner in town in Portland. And as I was describing it, because I know her, she's like, Elizabeth, what are you doing? This woman comes up to me, a complete stranger. She said, I'm sorry, I overheard you. I want to work for a company like that. So it'll be a great way to connect people with companies that care about this stuff, and business to business referrals, right? As we need things, why not look for a company that's treating people well, that cares about this stuff.
And also
And
peer-to-peer companies problem solving. Right.
absolutely. Like we'll do forums every year to just help companies come together around this. And then consumers. Like it doesn't have to just be business to business referrals. If you know somebody's treating people well, why wouldn't I want to buy from them? Right? Like, and Shackley comes into this. Like I'm fully aware, like like if you want to really impact even beyond your employees and begin to impact the planet and other things, and take care from like the well-being perspective, there can be links to products and different things that are, for people who are really products and businesses that are caring about these things. I feel like we need to lift up the whole, the tide raises all the boats, right?
Yeah,
It's not just my business, it's raising all of these businesses that are focused on that care about similar things.
yeah, and I think that's as much as the backdrop of us. Just before we started the recording, talking about there's
Mm,
so much negativity out there. There's just a
mm,
wealth of positive things going on, and
mm,
I kind of find it
mm.
as much as there's some of this might be some of the most dire times in respect. There's also some of the most exciting times.
Oh, I see it
Having
every day.
yeah, having
Mm,
having been a facilitator, coach for decades.
yeah.
What I know, unfortunately, about us human beings is no significant, meaningful change comes without crisis.
Right.
So
Right.
I, I'm just applaud the work that you're doing, and I think that it
Thank you.
just sort of coming here. I think
Mm,
how do people find you and the Mindful Employer Collaborative, and
mm.
what's just sort of give us a how do we connect with that, and how do
Yeah.
we connect and join?
It's mindfulemployer-us.com. So
Okay.
mindfulemployer-us.com. And then you can send an email to me at mindfulemployerus at gmail.com.
Okay.
So those are two ways. And then you can, Elizabeth Ross Holmstrom, you can find me on LinkedIn. If you don't remember anything else and just remember the name. But Mindful Employer is pretty straightforward. And just remember, we're in the US right now.
And I'll get it sort of in the end titles here. But
Yeah.
oh, Elizabeth, the conversation, I just love my conversations with you. And I thought, because of that, I
Thank
really
you.
want to. You're kind of my first inaugural, so.
Thank you. Neil, anything that you do, I'm such a huge supporter of, because you've been doing this work long before I ever even stumbled upon it. And you're just one of my heroes. So thank you for everything you do.
Mutual collaboration.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to wrap it here. I'm going to say thank you so much, Elizabeth.
You're welcome.
And if people are, one, obviously I'll put kind of the credits up, that if people have comments on this, love to hear your thoughts and input and share ideas. I think that would be wonderful.
Yes, please.
Creative thought in there. All right, so let me just kind of stop this and we're all good. Thank you so much.